Hey everyone, Christine McKay here for another episode of In the Venn Zone. Welcome. We are so glad you are here. So today's topic, first of all, if you are watching us on YouTube, please click the subscribe button and like this video. If you are watching us or listening to us rather on your favorite podcast platform, please leave us a review. We would love to hear from you. And if you are watching this live and on social media, please leave a comment and a note. Let us know if you think we've got it on the mark, hit it on the nose, or if you think we're full of crap. Either way, we are good with that because we like differences. So please check in with us. So today we're going to talk about, I've had a bunch of people ask me what my thoughts are from a negotiation perspective on Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and First Republic. So I thought I would give you some of my thoughts about what drove some of the behavior, what is driving some of the behavior, and how that could be or could have been influenced by negotiation. So let's just kind of at a macro level, talk a little bit about what the heck has happened, right? So in Silicon Valley Bank, we had a lot of tech companies who were depositors in Silicon Valley Bank. Those depositors were encouraged many times by their venture capitalists or the private equity firms to use those specific banks as vehicles for their payroll. So part of what happened is the front end is that people made, so banks, in my opinion, are no different than any vendor. If you produce widgets, if you produce a piece of hardware and you have raw materials vendors, you know, your bank is just another vendor. They're literally a vendor. And so part of what happened at the front end of this whole process is that people did what they were told without actually assessing whether or not that was the right institution for them. Now, some of you might like scream out at me and go, "Oh my God, Christine, you are so naive." And you might be right. But in my experience, if we spend time to do the research to understand what are the values of the different institutions? What are the objectives of the institutions? What are the policies? How are they making investments? How are they doing loans? How is that going to benefit us? Where are they putting their money? What is the relationship with the individuals making the recommendation to those institutions, right? Because if that relationship is really, really tight, then I may want to have more of an arm's length relationship. So there are just all sorts of questions that could have been answered earlier in the process that may have prevented some of the depositors from falling into this situation. That may be the case. It may not. The beauty of being at this stage of it is that I get to play armchair evaluator, armchair negotiator, not in those conversations. But this is what I see. I have worked in technology. I have worked in Silicon Valley for technology companies. And based anecdotally on my experience, I see a lot of times when a big investor swoops in and says, thou shalt. And as soon as thou shalt happens, a lot of times there's a negative on the back end of what that means. And so, you know, as if you're an executive in a company and you get one of those big investors, you have to figure out how to have those hard conversations, to push back, to have your data, have your research done, to have a plan. And so that you can talk to that investor, because unless there's something really weird going on, your investor wants you to make money. They're looking to make money themselves. So therefore, they want to be able to make the best possible decision that yields the best possible financial outcome for them, and albeit for you as well. So if you have done the homework, the research, you have a plan, communicate it, talk about it, talk about why it doesn't fit for you, talk about misalignments, and have dialogue about it. Don't be afraid to have that dialogue. And we're going to talk about that one word here in just another minute. So then you get into the banks, and I've actually reached out and talked to different people along this this whole journey. People who are depositors in these banks, I've talked to people who are in these banks, and I've talked to some of the investors. The only people that I've not talked to is anyone in the Fed. So talking to some of the people in the bank, the question that some of them have is, what negotiations were happening with the Fed earlier that we may not have responded to effectively? So was there an opportunity to negotiate with the Fed earlier in the process, negotiate internally to get operational changes that could have mitigated the situation? Probably there were. Hindsight is always 2020. So there were probably things that each of these banks could have done differently, either in terms of how they were handling their portfolio or how they were operationalizing certain things that actually made an impact on whether or not the Fed came in to take them over or not. Could that have been prevented? And it probably could. I'm reminded of, somebody, a speaker I once heard talking about fighter pilots landing on aircraft carriers. And every once in a while, a pilot is convinced he's going to make it, but he's actually missing the aircraft carrier, and he's going to fly into the side of the aircraft carrier. And so, but no matter what the person on the deck is saying, pull up, pull up, pull up, the pilot is sometimes going, I got it, I got it, I got it, until they hit the side of the aircraft carrier. Clearly, they didn't have it, right? And so what in that situation with the bank, or with the bank's leaderships, was them being that aircraft carrier or that fighter pilot saying, I got it, I got it, I got it. And then they didn't have it. And what about acknowledging that they didn't have it was why was it that they could not acknowledge that they didn't have it, and that they either needed additional support or they needed to negotiate differently internally within their own institutions and with their investors? Then you have the third part, which is the run on the banks, where you have people kind of getting into a groupthink environment where it was like a set of dominoes. One dropped, the next one dropped, and all of a sudden you start seeing a hysterical response to, oh my God, we got to get our money out, without taking a pause, without stopping and breathing and going, what are the facts? What's actually going on here? Are there mitigation options, et cetera? Now, I'm not talking, there clearly are people who have done that. So this is not an indictment on anyone. It's not a judgment call, but there are people who did not do that, who did not pause. And they're the ones calling the bankers today, screaming and yelling, freaking out. The sky is falling. Everything's going to collapse. And is it really? Well, the reality is probably not. As soon as we start thinking in superlatives, it's the best, it's the worst, right? I start to get a little bit kind of going, is it really the best? Is it really the worst? Probably not. It's probably something less than. And what is that something less than? So we find ourselves in this situation, right? Because we have these three major points of failure, right? And all of them came from one big thing. Now, on next week's episode, I'm talking with Owen Fitzpatrick, and you're going to be able to hear us talk a little more in depth about this topic that I'm about to go into. But it's really important to talk about today, because this run, this whole cycle of things that we're seeing is really driven by an emotional response, and emotion is not rational. In fact, emotion, in my experience, is an involuntary response to a situation we're experiencing right now, but that involuntary response is coming from something in our past. We've experienced something in the past and then we've attached an emotion to it. And so we're bringing that into the present, and we're looking for the similarities. oh my God, the thing here is so similar to this other thing. Therefore, I've got to feel like this. Oh my God, the world is ending. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to get fired. My wife is going to leave me. My partner's going to leave me, blah, 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 blah. And we conjure this crazy story in our head and we react based on that story. So underpinning all of this is that insanely horrible 4-letter F word. And it's not Gary V's favorite word, but it is fear, right? It is fear. What are the fears that are driving that behavior? And what happens is we get into this fear response and we start, as my friend Blair Dunkley talks about, we start reliving the past versus simply remembering it and isolating that memory, saying, what lessons can I apply from that experience into today? So we have this huge fear response that has driven different parts of this whole issue, all the way from the beginning of it to how do I choose to what bank do I choose to use? You know, the CFO or the CEO is afraid of standing up to somebody saying, this is what I'm going to do. They're not looking at the data and the facts, and they're not making an independent evaluation. Is that guaranteed to have been the situation? No, but it's very likely to have been the situation for a lot of depositors. Then you have the fear of, oh my God, I can't let them know that I don't have it, that I've messed up, that I'm out of control, that I've got some things that are broken, and I can't get my people operating fast enough to make the change, or I've overexposed myself in certain areas and I can't claw it back fast enough, but I can't let somebody know. If somebody in management at those banks had let people know that they were in trouble earlier, then other things could have been done to mitigate the situation. So people's fear drove them not to ask for the appropriate level of help. And then the run is a function of fear. People were afraid of missing out or getting caught in the aftermath. They were afraid of losing everything. And so they told themselves that that was a possibility, and they made it a real possibility, right? Well, all of this could have been avoided if people at each of these different stages had followed the basic tenets of the McKay methodology, right? The methodology that I talk about all the time in negotiating. If they had assessed properly, assessed their own needs relative to the counterpart, in this case, the banks, and the situation, right? When you're assessing, you assess you, them, and it. What does that look like? If they had asked, based on that assessment, if they had asked more specifically for what they were looking for and what they wanted, and had been willing to ask for help, I mean, why not ask, right? A conversation about getting more. Why not ask? If they had asked, and then if they had taken action once they asked, if those 3 simple steps that we lay out in our methodology had been followed, right, then much of this could have been avoided, right? Because those three simple things, right, allow us to evaluate our emotion, to label it accurately, and then gives us the opportunity to choose how to behave in a different way, right? So now what we have, how do we move forward, right? We could have done something different. We could have assessed, asked, and acted in different ways, but now we are where we are, and it is what it is, right? So what do we do? What do we do now? Well, guess what? The same policy, the same 3 steps of the process are still relevant. Let's take a moment. Let's pause. Let's assess. What is the real situation? What are the facts? What is the data telling us? How does that data relate to where we are? If we can figure out how to separate our emotion from this current situation and start to look at it objectively, and there will be somebody who will sit and say, if they listen to this, they'll go, "Oh my God, you just don't get me," right? So this is where you don't want to focus on the differences. You want to focus on the similarities. You know what? Your banker that you're screaming at has as much, if not more, personal risk in this situation than you do as an investor, because his or her family livelihood is tied up in this bank. And so they have risk too. Find those commonalities, find those similarities, and figure out, okay, we all have risk involved here. Now, how do we rebuild, knowing that we have risk? How do we rebuild our trust? How do we rebuild the honesty of our relationship? And how do we move forward, right? And we do that by assessing, asking different questions, and then taking action one step at a time. So if you can apply this to the fraught conversations that you are having, whether you are a depositor at any of these banks, whether you are working at any of these banks, or whether you are an investor in either the banks or an investor in these companies that are depositors, take that moment, pause, breathe, look at the data, look at the information, assess what's really going on, and don't allow yourself, give yourself the power to choose how you're going to act in spite of how you may be feeling. Disconnect your actions from that emotion, because that is where the power is going to come for you in how you manage the situation effectively. I don't know if any of this made sense to you. I'm really curious to see what your thoughts are on what I just talked about. I am not in this industry. I have worked in financial services before, but in a different way. And so I'm really curious to learn from you what about this might be effective for you and what might not work for you, given your current situation in this banking turmoil. So I hope you tune in again. Again, if you are on YouTube, please like and subscribe, like this video and hit the subscribe button. If you are watching or listening on your favorite podcast platform, please leave us a rating and a review. And if you are on social media, please drop us a line. Let us know you're out there, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you again on our next episode of In the Venn Zone, when we are talking with Mr. Owen Fitzpatrick about the role of emotion in negotiation and how NLP plays a role or doesn't in your negotiations. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.